Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kunal here. Today we are going to read about the strengths and the limitations of the experimental research. First, strengths. It helps in establishing the cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variable. Second, the experimenter can exercise control. She can systematically manipulate some variables, carefully measure other variables, and can also make some variables constant. Third, replication of result under similar control conditions is possible. Limitations. Exercising absolute control over variables is not possible. Experimental laboratory setting is artificial, making the generalization of the results to the real self world a little difficult. The subjects may behave differently in a lab setting and in real life. The result may get impacted by certain biases. Some of the most common biases encountered in experiments are: first, selection bias. It occurs when differences between groups are already present at the beginning of the experiment. Example, differences in age, intelligence, etc. Second, experimenter bias. These are the ways that the experimenter can accidentally influence the participant. For example, influence through their appearance or behavior. Third, demand characteristics. These refers to the clues in an experiment that lead the participants to think they know that the researcher is looking for. Example, experimenter's body language might suggest approval, disapproval to the subject as well as may influence subject's responses. Third, correlational research. First, a description of the correlational research. It enables the researchers to study the relationship between different variables. The correlational method involves looking at relationship between two or more variables. While researchers can use correlation to see if a relationship exists among variables, the variables themselves are not under the control of the researcher. Correlational research is a type of the non-experimental research in which the researcher measures two variables and assesses the statistical relationship, that is the correlation, between them with little or no effort to control extraneous variables. These are essentially two reasons that the researchers interested in statistical relationships between variables would choose to conduct a correlational study rather than an experiment. The first reason is that the researcher does not believe that the statistical relationship is a casual one. For example, a researcher might want to study the relationship between the number of classes attended and the marks obtained in the exams by students. This researcher might then check to see whether participants' exam scores are strongly correlated with the number of classes attended. Neither of the two variables in the case, that is the number of classes attended and the exam scores, is thought to cause the other, so there is no independent variables to manipulate. Second, the other reasons that researchers would choose to use correlational study rather than an experiment is that the researchers cannot manipulate the independent variable because it is impossible, impractical, and unethical. For example, if the researchers are interested in studying the effect of everyday stressors on physical and mental health of individuals, then in order to conduct an experiment, manipulation of amount of everyday stressors in this case could not be possible. Hence, the researcher could settle for measuring the number of everyday stressors along with the number of physical and the mental symptoms. Later, the researcher can find out if there is any relationship between the number of everyday stressors and number of physical and mental symptoms reported by the participants. Different types of correlations. First, positive correlation is a relationship between two variables in which both variables either increase or decrease at the same time. For example, the relationship between the two variables height and weight. As height increases, weight also increases. Negative correlation in a relationship between two variables in which an increase in one variable is associated with a decrease in the other. For example, increase in practice and decrease in errors. With increase in practice, errors tend to decrease. With increase in practice, errors tend to decrease. Zero correlations or correlations. exist when there is no relationship. When there is no relationship between two variables. For example, there is no relationship between the color of the eye and intelligence. The correlation value or the correlation index changes from zero point 0.1 to 1, in which the positive and the negative also indicates the direction of the relationship and does not indicate anything about the strength of the relationship. Whereas the correlation value indicates the strength of the relationship. For example, a correlation value of positive zero point 0.5 indicates a weak positive correlation minus 41, minus 0.41 indicates a moderate negative correlation, while a value of minus 0.89 indicates a strong negative correlation. Strengths and limitations of correlational research. Strength correlation allows the research to investigate naturally occurring variables that may be unethical or impractical to test experimentally. For example, it would be unethical to conduct an experiment on whether alcohol consumption causes liver damage. Second, correlation allows the researchers to clearly and easily say if there is a relationship between variables. Limitations of correlations. Correlation does not establish causation. Even if there is a very strong association between the two variables, we cannot assume that one causes the other. C. Differences between correlation and experiments. An experiment isolates and manipulates the independent variables to observe its impact on the dependent variable. In an experiment, attempt is made to control the impact of extraneous variables on the findings. Thus, experiments help in establishing cause and effect relationships. A correlation, on the other hand, identifies variables and look for relationship between them. Unlike experiments, that reflects on the effect that an independent variable has upon a dependent variable. A correlation looks for the relationship between two variables. This means that the experiment can credit cause and effect, but a correlation can only predict a relationship. Coming up, types of research design. Uh, Use of statistical methods in psychological research. The data obtained from the researchers using the methods of psychological research is described, organized, classified, and analyzed using statistics. Summing up, types of research designs. Comparative description of these research designs. First, research design descriptive. Goal: to create a snapshot of the current state affairs. Advantages: provides relatively complete picture of what is occurring at a given time. Third, disadvantages: does not assess relationship among variables as control cannot be exercised. Second, correlational: to access the relationship between the two variables, allows testing of expected relationships between variables, cannot be used to draw disadvantages cannot be used to draw inference about its causal relationship among the variables. Experimental: to cause the causal impact of one or more experimental manipulations on a dependent variable. Second, advantages: allow establishing causal relationships among variables. Third, disadvantages: difficulty in experimentally manipulating many different variables may be an expensive and time consuming source. Activity discussion: for each of the following, decide whether it is most likely that the study described in experimental or correlational, and explain why. An education researcher compares the performance of students exposed to different training programs. Second, a teacher wants to study the relationship between the students' reading scores and writing scores. Third, a researcher is interested to study the recall of words in two conditions. First, when the participant is instructed to read it loud, and B, when the participant is instructed to create an image related to the word in mind. Fourth, the food technology expert wants to study the relationship between the temperature set of a refrigerator and the amount of bacteria found in the refrigerated food. Answer: experimental, correlational, experimental and correlational. Use of statistics method in psychological research. The data obtained by the researchers using the method of psychological research is described, organized, classified, and analyzed using statistics. Statistics can be defined as a science of classifying, analyzing, and organizing of quantitative data. These are two components of statistics. First, descriptive. Its purpose is to organize and summarize data. When we collect data, sometimes it is an unorganized form. For example, Radhika rolls out of dice 30 times and gets the following scores of this type. The frequency table has made the data better organized. However, the data can further be depicted using the graphical method of representation that shows how frequently a number of dice occurs with greater clarity. For example, bar diagram, frequency polygon, or pie chart could be used. Relative frequency percentage depicting bar diagram. Further measures of central tendency such as mean, median, mode could be used to give a single summary figure that best describes about the given set of observation. The detailed explanation of the various measures used in the descriptive statistics would be discussed in the subsequent chapter, chapter 5. Second, inferential. Its purpose is to draw a conclusion about conditioning that exists in a population from the study of a sample wherein a population is defined as a complete set of observation about which the researcher wants to draw conclusions, whereas a simple sample is a small set of population that the researcher studies. Of class 10 students in Delhi. Then the academic performance of all the class 10 students studying across all schools, private and government, to entire Delhi could be of interest. Since it is not feasible, it covers an entire population. Therefore, the researchers would systematically study a small sample from the population. For example, the researchers may divide Delhi into four main zones, such as East, West, North, and South, and take out a sample from both government and private schools of each of the four zones to ensure representative sample. Class 10 students in Delhi schools, private and government schools, North Zone, East Zone, West Zone, and South Zone. Role of statistic in psychological research. Statistics play an important and very important role in the psychological research because first, data and information can be presented briefly and precisely. Results obtained are more accurate and objective. Third, analysis of data is made more scientific. Fourth, general conclusions can be arrived at. Fifth, making comparative analysis is possible. Sixth, relationship between two or more variables can be objectively investigated. Predictions about behavior can be made. Goals of psychological research. First, explain, predict, control, describe, improve. Methods of psychological inquiry. Types of research design. First, experimental, descriptive, correlational. Components of statistics used in psychological research. Inferential and correlational. Correlational. Types of psychological research. On the basis of goals, applied basic. On the basis of settings, laboratory and field. On the basis of research methods, quantitative and qualitative. Thank you and thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Kindly subscribe to this channel.